If I had to give you three words that I believe are the most important words for you to remember as you go through life, what do you think they would be? Welcome to Something to Live By. My name is Tony Edwards. I appreciate so much of you tuning in. If you're watching for the first time, thank you for being here. Be with us every Tuesday at 9 o'clock p.m. Locally here in Decatur and the surrounding counties, we come on channel 51. If you have Charter Spectrum, you can pick us up on channel 20. And we want you to become committed to the program so we can grow in Christ and our knowledge of the Word of God together. If you're back with us again, thank you so much for continuing to watch the program and giving us your support. We appreciate it. It means so much. It really does. It means so much to me. It means so much to those of us here at the Decatur Church of Christ. We appreciate it very much. Now, before I get started, I'm a big football fan. Okay, I'm a big football fan. And I know that people who watch the program are football fans as well. So what I want to do at the beginning of my program, at least for the football season, is I want to make some predictions. And I want to make about 4 or 5 predictions, not a lot. I'm just going to do a few schools from the SEC and for this upcoming Saturday. Now, I'm an Alabama fan, big Alabama fan. So quite natural, I'm going to pick Alabama to win. And this Saturday, I believe Alabama is going to beat Southern Mississippi. Auburn is also playing. They're playing Texas A&M. I predict Auburn will beat them. It may be a close one, but I think Auburn is going to beat them. Tennessee is playing Florida, and even though I like Tennessee, I believe Florida is going to beat them. We got Georgia playing Notre Dame. I think out of the weekend games, this one right here is going to probably be the one to watch. It comes on later Saturday evening, and I believe Georgia is going to end up beating Notre Dame. I believe South Carolina is going to beat Missouri, and I think Kentucky is going to beat Mississippi State. So we shall see. I'll let you know on the next program how many I got right and how many I got wrong. All right, having said that, if I had to give you 3 words that would describe how you should live your life, if I had to give you 3 words that are meaningful, I mean, when you hear these 3 words, they're not ambiguous. I mean, they are clear. They tell you what you need to do in any situation you find yourself in that may be a difficult one. Now, for the last couple of programs, we've been talking about hope. Okay? We talked about hope in the first program, how God is in control and how we need to keep our eyes on Christ. In the second program, we talked about hope in the sense that a lot of times the future that we see for ourselves, God sees something totally different. When we have lost hope, God tells us to have hope because He knows the future He has planned for us. In this program, I want to talk about something that I think is important. Because during those moments that we begin to lose hope, during those moments where we become discouraged, frustrated with life, it seems like nothing around us is going right. As I have said before, there is a tendency to want to stop living life. There's a tendency to give up. But there's 3 words that I want you to remember. I don't care what situation you find yourself in. I want you to remember these words right here. Never give up. Do you suppose the little engine that could? You read that book when you were a child? I remember reading it when I was a young boy. And that was one of my favorite stories. I used to just love seeing the train go up the hill and making those train sounds. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. I know I can, I know I can, I know I can. And before you know it, the little train that couldn't became the little train that could. But only because of one reason. It never gave up. And to illustrate this from the Bible, I want to turn over to one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible, with the exception of the stories that pertain to Jesus. The life of Joseph is one of my favorite. And we're going to turn over to Genesis chapter 37. So make sure you got your Bible ready. Make sure you got something to write with. Make sure you got something to take notes on so that you can follow me, check behind the things that I say, and have you something to go back and read and study in your spare time as well. Now, the story of Joseph begins in Genesis chapter 37. We're not going to read every aspect of it, but there are some parts of the story that I do want to read in order to make some applications to you and to myself a little later on. So in Genesis chapter 37, those of you who know the story, remember that Joseph was a special child. He was a child who was probably favored more than the other kids. If you look at Genesis chapter 37 and verse number 3, it says, now Israel, that is Jacob, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. And this is one thing you do not do, show favoritism when it comes to children. But Jacob did this. He showed favoritism toward Joseph, and because he showed this favoritism toward Joseph, Joseph's other brothers hated him. He had 11 other brothers. They hated his guts. On top of that, Joseph had a couple of dreams, and in those dreams, Joseph indicate or implied, at least they thought, that one day they would be bowing down to him, that they would be serving him one day, and this just pushed them over the edge. And at this moment, his own flesh and blood, his family members, began to conspire as to how to get rid of him, how to kill him. Could you imagine? I mean, we look around in our day and time now and we see families breaking and crumbling. And we say, wow, what is this world coming to? And I agree with you, it's sad to see those things happen. But these things have been going on throughout the history of mankind. I mean, Joseph's brothers, for goodness sake, wanted to kill him. And the only reason they didn't is because of one of the brothers. Look at Genesis chapter 37, verse 18. Joseph went out to find his brothers one day because they were not at home. Verse 18 says, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, look, the dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say a wild beast has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Jealousy is not an emotion that is new in our day and time. It's something that has existed for a long time, and we see it right here. These boys became so angry and so jealous of Joseph that they wanted to kill him. They wanted to kill him. But his younger brother Reuben in verse 21 says this right here to them. Let us not kill him. And he convinced them not to kill him. And so instead of killing Joseph, here's what they did in verse 24. They took him and they cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in him, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Joseph had been thrown in a pit, alone, forsaken, abandoned, neglected by himself. Suppose Joseph would have given up on life at this moment. I mean, he had every reason to give up on life. His family was against him. His family wanted to kill him. In his mind, he probably would never see his daddy again, his mama, because he didn't know what was going to happen to him. I mean, just the emotional toll of knowing that your family is against you, that in itself is enough to drive someone crazy. What do you think was going through his mind while he was down in this hole, in this valley, and in this pit? I can tell you one thing that was going through his mind, and it had to do with 3 words. He was never gonna quit. He was never gonna give up. It wasn't in his DNA. And though he didn't know how he would get out of the pit or what he would do when he got out, quitting was not one of them. So as they began to eat, verse 25 says, they saw a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with camels bearing spices and balms. Verse 26, and Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and let our hands be upon him. Let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother, and we are his flesh. And his brothers listened, and then the Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Wow. What a turnaround. They didn't kill him. He's our flesh and blood. Yeah, he's your flesh and blood, but you didn't kill him, but you sold him down into Egypt. Could you imagine what was going through Joseph's mind as a prisoner, as a slave, headed to Egypt? Probably a lot. Emotions going everywhere. But I can tell you one thing that was not on his mind. 3 words. He was not gonna quit. Joseph was not gonna give up. It was not in his DNA. It did not come across his mind. And even if it had came across his mind, he would not let it get the best of him. So he ends up in Egypt as a slave. He became prosperous while in Egypt. Everything he did, the Lord made to prosper. And the reason the Lord made everything he did to prosper is because Joseph lived for the Lord. And Joseph was going to continue to live for the Lord as long as he lived his life. So he gets down into Egypt. He ends up being in Potiphar's house, over Potiphar's house. And he comes into contact with Potiphar's wife, who wanted to sleep with him. Joseph, being the dedicated follower of God that he was said no. And he made her so angry that she lied on him and told her husband that Joseph had raped her, had slept with her, and she was lying the whole time. And Genesis chapter 39, verse 19 says this, and when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused, then Joseph's master took him, put him into prison on a place where king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. I mean, how much more can this young boy take? He was sold into slavery at probably about 18 years old. We don't quite know the age right here, but he is somewhere between 17 and 30. Now someone has lied on him. He's in prison. He didn't do anything. He spent 2 years of his life in prison, all because someone lied on him and said he did something that he did not do. Could you imagine the emotions this boy is going through right now? His family has betrayed him. He misses his mom and his dad. He's been a slave. Okay, he's been converted from a young man of promise who had a prosperous life ahead of him, and he's been relegated to the position of a slave and now a prisoner. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine what was on this boy's mind? I know one thing that was not on his mind. 3 words. He was never gonna quit. He was not gonna give up. It wasn't in his DNA. Joseph relied on God for his strength. Even while he was in prison, he interpreted the dreams of two of the prisoners, and eventually that led him to be released from prison to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And when Pharaoh saw that Joseph had the ability to interpret his dream, he placed Joseph over all of Egypt. You know something? There's only one reason this happened. And we find it back in chapter 39, beginning with verse number 1. It says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did prosper in his hand." Not only does the Bible say the Lord was with Joseph and everything Joseph did prosper, but the Bible says the people around could see God blessing Joseph's life. Everybody around could see it. What if he had given up on life? What if he had quit? What if he had quit at the first sign that he saw his brothers didn't like him? What if he had given up on life when he saw his brothers turn their back on him? What if he had given up at the idea that his brothers even thought about killing him? What if he had given up on life the moment he became a slave? What if he had given up on life the moment that lady lied on him? What if he had given up on life when he ended up in prison? What if he had given up on life at every dark moment, at every moment that he, in his mind, thought he could not make it through? What if he had given up? What if he had given up? What if he had quit? He would have been missing out on a blessing that God had in store for him. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 37, it says this: "So the advice was good in Pharaoh's eyes and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, 'Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?'" Talking about Joseph. Pharaoh turned and looked at his servants. He said, "Man, y'all, is there anybody else in Egypt like this?" The answer is no. Can we find anybody in whom is the Spirit of God like this boy? The answer is no. The Spirit of God ran rich in him because he relied on God's strength for his life. When he was in the pit, he relied on God's strength. When he was with the other slaves, he relied on God's strength. When he was lied on, he relied on God's strength. When he was in prison, he relied on God's strength. And that dependence on God was seen by everybody who came in contact with him. They didn't see a boy who was willing to give up when he ran into difficult times. They saw a boy with in which the Spirit of God was so strong that his persistence, his will to keep moving forward was second to none. And this is the type of person that Pharaoh wanted working for him. So in verse 39, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all the people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh said, "Joseph, I'm putting my kingdom in your hands." Now, what if Joseph had given up? Because if I had a chart and we put the beginning of Joseph's life right here and the end of Joseph's life right here, Do you know what the graph would look like in order for him to be here? Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. I had that backwards. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Down. If he had quit, that never would have been an up. Up, down. If he had quit, there never would have been an up. Up, down. If he had quit, there never would have been an up. If he had quit at any point when he was down, he never would have saw, he never would have seen the ultimate blessing that God had waiting for him. And you know what? When I think about this story, I think about my life. I think about your life. And I've asked myself, how many times have I given up on a situation too quickly? How many times have I given up on people too quickly? How many times have I given up on myself too quickly? And God was standing there looking at me saying, keep going. Don't give up. I've got something for you. And I couldn't hear him. And what I want to encourage you to do from this point forward is do what Joseph did. Never give up. You cannot judge your future based upon the pit. You cannot judge your future based upon slavery. You cannot judge your future based upon lies that are told on you. You cannot base your future on being in prison. You cannot base your future on a family that has fallen apart. You cannot base your future on finances that have been or are being destroyed. You cannot base your future on a job that you have lost. You cannot base your future and the outcome of your future on where you currently are. God has something better in store, but you cannot give up. You can't give up. You can't give up. Everything's going to be all right. But if you give up, then you will miss out on the beauty that God has planned for your life. At the end of the story in Genesis chapter 50, Joseph's brothers had to come down to Egypt and they had to buy grain. They had no idea he was over Egypt. But they came down. They finally saw that he was over Egypt. They were afraid. And then their father died and they were really afraid. After their father died, they said to one another, man, we got to lie. We got to do something. We got to make up something, because while our father was living, that was the only thing keeping Joseph from taking revenge on us. So they did. They got together in Genesis chapter 50, verse 16. They sent messengers to Joseph and they told Joseph, our daddy said, don't mess with us. Our daddy said, don't mess with us. And they finally came to Joseph in verse 18 of Genesis 50, and they bowed down before him and they said, we are your servants. We're your servants, Joseph. We're your servants. And Joseph told them in verse 19, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. How could he say something like that after everything they did for him? To him. Well, it's simple. Joseph was living for God. And Joseph, I believe, realized that the things that happened to him in his life were not God's doing, but God utilized every one of those things in order to bring about his greatest blessing of being over all of Egypt. Joseph understood that. And so, whereas they were looking at it as them doing something bad to Joseph, Joseph looked at it as them doing something good for him. They meant it for my bad, Joseph says, but God meant it for my good. Verse number 20, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for the good. You were planning something bad. God was planning something good. You were thinking of evil. God was thinking of something beautiful. You had my downfall in mind. God had my uprise in mind. You had my hurt on your mind. God had my healing on his mind. You thought you were ending my life. God said, your life is just beginning, son. But I need you to do something. Don't give up. Don't give up. And if you're watching, please, no matter what's going on in your life, never give up. Hold on. And everything is going to be all right. Thank you so much for watching the program. I am blessed by your presence. And I pray to God that your life will be turned around very soon. God bless you. Take care. And we see you again next time on Something to Live By.
I fail and I give up. Do you think that I'm ever going to get up? No. But if I fail, I try again and again and again. For as long as I try, there's always that chance of getting up. Does that make sense? And it's not the end until you've given up. And just the fact that you're here should persuade you that you have another chance to get back up. There's still hope. I'm not here today to tell you that I understand your pain. I don't know how it feels to be abused. I don't know how it feels to feel, quote, fat and you've got an eating disorder. I don't know how it feels to have a broken home. I don't know how it feels. But I know how it feels to have a broken heart. And I know how it feels to be alone. And I want you to know that I found my strength in Jesus Christ, and you're going to find your strength in whatever you find it in. But I just want you to know that it's not the end. It matters how you're going to finish. Are you going to finish strong? And you will find that strength to get back up like this.